Keeping up with security issues across thousands of web assets without the right approach to web application security is a daunting task. Get ahead with web vulnerability scanning automation from NetSparker, a leader in dynamic and interactive application security testing known for its ease of use and accurate results. Detect a wide range of vulnerabilities in all legacy and modern web applications, address security bugs at scale by automating the confirmation process, automatically prioritize vulnerabilities, and assign actionable tickets to the right developers in their native workflows for rapid remediation. For more information on how to scale application security with ease, visit securityweekly.com/NetSparker. Qualys has brought together vulnerability management and patch management, letting security teams discover vulnerabilities and apply patches immediately, all within a single, unified app. Sign up for a free trial of Qualys VMDR, vulnerability management, detection, and response today at securityweekly.com/Qualys. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. InfoSec World 2021 is proud to announce its keynote lineup from this year. Hear from Robert Herjavec, plus heads of security at NFL, TikTok, U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Stanford University, and more. Security Weekly listeners save 20% off on your digital pass. securityweekly.com/ISW 2021 to register today. Let's see. Don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to any of our podcast feeds and have all new episodes downloaded right to your device. You can also join us on our mailing list, Discord server, follow us on social media and our streaming platforms, all at securityweekly.com/subscribe. Lots of news articles to cover this week. Where does everyone like to begin?
I think I'd like to take it to a somber note to right at the beginning. Your story number 15.
My story number 15. I'm scrolling. What was my... Oh, yes. So Kim Zetter tweeted. She's, of course, the Wired author, editor, and blogger, and the author of Countdown to Zero Day, which I believe all of us have read.
Yep, I have.
So in the book, you'll remember, and I mean, folks that haven't read the book, that are familiar with the story, know that A.Q. Khan was the Pakistani scientist that is known for stealing, I'll read her tweet, right? Stealing centrifuge designs from a Dutch company, then using that to launch Pakistan's illicit nuclear program, and then selling those designs and centrifuge parts to Iran, Libya, and North Korea. Has died. He's died from COVID, which is interesting.
I did not know that.
Or plutonium,
Or yes,
the official
thallium.
I mean, I didn't dig into the story and validate the cause of death, but it's listed, from Kim Zetter as COVID. So.
Yep, and if Kim's reporting it, I kind of trust that.
Yeah, I mean, she's upstanding journalist for sure.
Yep.
So.
Speaking of upstanding journalism,
fake news.
Speaking of upstanding journalism, where did this one go of yours? Your story number 6.
Scrolling.
Missouri governor vows to prosecute St. Louis Post-Dispatch for reporting security vulnerability.
And this is just there's gonna be a couple of segues off of this one, right? It's a lot of. This one grinds your gears, man. You need to read this. So, Missouri governor has vowed to prosecute St. Louis Post-Dispatch, is a media outlet, for reporting a security vulnerability. This is according to Krebs on Security. The quote that I pulled out was, the newspaper said that it found that teachers' social security numbers were contained in the HTML source code of the pages involved. So their information was available to anyone with a web browser. Now, they disclosed this responsibly to the state of Missouri. Then the state of Missouri, I believe, fixed it before they then went public with it. I could be getting my stories mixed up, though. But the Missouri governor was saying, hackers are people who gain unauthorized access to things and commit heinous criminal acts, and therefore we are going to prosecute them to the fullest extent of the law.
And they did not have permission to do what they did. They had no authorization to convert or decode, so this was clearly a hack. Right click, view as source.
No hash. I think the governor of Missouri doesn't understand the CFAA. I am not an attorney by any stretch of the imagination, but I have to venture to guess that this is likely not going to be classified as hacking. Although, I mean, look at Weave's case. That that is also case law that is on the books too. So there's that. Again, I'm not an attorney, right?
Yep.
But I also thought that, I believe it was Aaron Mackey, who is a senior staff attorney at the EFF, said that Governor Parsons' response to this incident also was unfortunate because it will almost certainly give pause to anyone who might otherwise find and report security vulnerabilities in state websites that unnecessarily expose sensitive information, which also means such weaknesses are more likely to be eventually found and exploited by actual criminals.
I don't know if I'd give that. I wouldn't give that pause.
Okay,
I'd report
so what
it.
I'm hearing is, if I drop money on the floor outside of the bank, it's going to incentivize more criminals to come crack the vault.
No, I don't. That's not a good analogy, Josh. Love you, but that's not.
All right, then what's a good? I mean, because this is bullshit.
I think it's kind of. Yeah.
Not.
Maybe a little flawed. If I drop money outside the bank, if I drop money outside the bank, it might incentivize attackers to stand out in front of all the banks and waiting for someone to drop off money.
That's called panhandlers. It happens now.
Well, there's a difference in asking for it or just picking it up off.
Like if the tellers were leaving money like out in the parking lot like temporarily before they put it in the vault, and someone reported that, and then they wanted to prosecute them, but now actual criminals are going to stand in the parking lot and pick up the money and steal it.
And I think in this case, like they're saying, you're not allowed to look at the encoded data.
Yeah, like pay no attention to the money sitting on the curb.
They put a piece of plain copy paper over the top of the money.
Right.
You're not allowed to look at that.
I've got it. If
how are you going to enforce
the vault out of money? If you build the walls of the vault out of money, and people start taking the money, you're like, oh my God, you're hacking, you're cracking the vault, you're breaking into the vault.
Sort of.
Like that's literally what we're talking about. They literally made the walls of the vault out of money, and then they're bitching that people take it.
I do want some of what you've been smoking tonight, though, Josh.
Drinking.
There you go. Tequila.
That, right?
There you go.
Yeah, Tyler. Tyler, to your point, how do they enforce that? Like,
speaking of which, can I have the bourbon?
If you don't report it, then there's no crime that happened, right? Like, I'm not seeing that correlation, because if you report it, then you've committed the crime. It is still there. It is still in the source code. So if you do not report it, you therefore have not committed the crime. But you can still see it because view source is available to anybody that has access to a browser.
Mm-hmm.
So the enforcement piece, like, this can't stand up because that'll set horrible precedents from an enforcement and jurisdiction standpoint. Like, whose property is that? Is that on the hosting provider? Because that's just direct code you're reviewing. That's not necessarily their property.
I mean, and let's be clear. When you get a web page, the copy of the web page is sent to you.
Mm-hmm.
It is now on your...
that means it is intended for you.
But
and
I also
own it because it's code on your machine.
Governor Parsons
given to you.
Governor Parsons said it is unlawful to access encoded data in systems in order to examine other people's personal information. But now, based on what you just said, the response of that is stored in my browser. Mm-hmm. It's not encoded.
Yeah, it is. It's encoded in HTML.
That's not encoded.
Yeah.
I'd argue that. I'd argue that in court. I'd have an expert witness to talk about what encoded is.
And I think he's confusing encoded and encrypted.
Could be.
He's conflating them. Yeah.
Could be.
But I mean, so we're talking about. I literally get the web page sent to my machine.
Lee,
it is on my machine. It
Lee's
is in my
mute.
hard drive. Sorry,
Lee was trying to talk, but he was on mute.
Oh, I'm sorry, Lee.
He's still on mute.
Lee's still on mute.
It's the other mute, Lee.
Lee, get younger.
Talk louder, Lee. Nope.
Josh is amazing. Oh my God, it's amazing how smart he is.
This does set bad precedents for like bug bounties and stuff, though, too. Like, you start to think about who reports information to you, who's actually doing the testing. If you don't have a bug bounty program, if you don't have an internal security team, if you don't have a pen test team looking at this stuff actively, which most state governments, small budgets, you should be very, very considerate of those people that are reporting stuff to you, because that's almost a free service. Even if you're giving them a small amount of info or a small amount of money, monetary value for this, that's still something. And if you don't treat them well, you don't have anybody looking at that, and bad guys are just taking it anyway. So if it's there, it's there.
Yeah, I mean, so the quote here says a hacker. I'll qualify that. I mean, what they really mean is a malicious hacker is someone who subverts computer security with malicious or criminal intent. In this case, Joe Martineau said there was no breach of any firewall or security and certainly no malicious intent. He says the Department of Missouri DESE is deflecting its failures by referring to this as hacking is unfounded.
Mm-hmm.
What's the crime against the Missouri teachers that he's committed?
I'm glad you brought that up, Lee. Yes. Go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to step on you.
Because I'm looking at it, the application exposed their social security numbers. That's where there's some accountability against the teachers. This guy who discovered it committed no crime against those teachers. I think he's going with every straw he can grab here.
I am siding with you, Lee, in saying the state of Missouri should be held accountable for mishandling personally PII of the teachers.
Well, I mean, this is only going to cost the taxpayers more money if they get sued for it, because the governor is saying that fixing the flaw could cost the state $50 million.
I can fix it. I can fix it for like $1 million. Like, you give me $1 million, I'll go in and fix it.
Look.
750,000.
I'll do it for $750,000.
What's the penalty for the PII disclosure going to be on this one? How many?
Right.
How much is that going to cost? That's going to be a fortune. But yeah, what do we know?
It was 100,000 social security numbers were available.
Just to be clear, anybody who's ever navigated to that site has a copy of that in their cache.
Correct.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sorry, and DESE is the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education in the state of Missouri.
I wonder, is it still there? Has anybody checked?
They said they've removed it. But yeah,
did they say? Yeah, I was
reportedly remove the affected pages from its website Tuesday. That means there's probably 7 or 8 more that are affected that they just haven't found yet.
We're getting some comments. Is this reminding people of coal fire? And do we have data breach law in Missouri? I'm wondering if they have a vulnerability.
All states have data breach.
It's not a data breach. It's just a surprise distributed backup.
This is true.
It only counts as a backup if you can restore it.
Oh, I mean, yeah, you just go get it from Have I Been Pwned. You're all good.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Oh, boy.
Oh, my God. Sorry. I went right for the deep end, didn't I?
No, because it's good because it ties into several other stories that we have.
It does. It does.
We can pivot now to the Telegram vulnerability.
Yep. Which is very related to some of the Apple stuff.
Yes. So let's do Telegram.
Yep.
So the bug or the vulnerability in Telegram was basically they had a self-destruct. I think that's what they called it in the article, was a self-destruct feature in Telegram that was released somewhat recently from what the article described. But basically, I go to Telegram and I go self-destruct, delete the application and all data is what you would believe that it would mean. But a researcher, Dimitri, his full name is in the article, Dimitri reported the bug to Telegram, which basically Dimitri discovered that, hey, when I self-destruct the app, it still leaves a whole bunch of files behind. And I don't think it's necessarily the vulnerability and the impact and or severity of the vulnerability that's in question. Dimitri reported this bug to Telegram in March. The firm acknowledged it. It didn't fix the bug for several months, despite other updates coming out for the Telegram client that were updates likely to features and maybe some other bugs, but not this particular bug. The researcher reminded them. The August 2021, the researcher confirmed that it still wasn't there. Then more problems happened. In response, Dimitri sent some questions to Telegram regarding the agreement he was supposed to sign. Never got a response. Researcher Dimitri noticed a lesser bounty was offered to him, and they wanted him to remain silent about this vulnerability, at which time Dimitri decided to forego any bug bounty payment and go for full public disclosure of this vulnerability tracked to CVE 2021-41861.
LCANETA.
Again, just the way that you treat researchers, it's the same issue that I have with Apple. Like, now Telegram's getting bad press over the treatment of a researcher, but like, what does it cost Telegram to treat the researcher nicely and respectfully and just fix the bug? Isn't that less than what, like, trying to hide it and coming under the scrutiny and now having the news outlets report that this happened? Also very interesting for bug bounties too, where even if you're offering the security researcher money, that's not enough for them to stay quiet. They'll make it public and forgo the bug bounty. Like, it's a real interesting situation with bug bounties.
I mean, we talked to Casey Ellis recently, and the bug bounty world is definitely changing.
Josh froze.
Apparently, somebody found a bug and didn't report it.
Audience that we're talking shit about.
Sorry, Josh, you broke up there.
Oh, okay. I was wondering, when we were talking to Casey Ellis, there were several people in the audience who were really talking crap about HackerOne and BugCrowd. It was interesting.
When did you talk to Casey?
Security and Compliance Weekly, like 2 weeks ago.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, just before I moved over here.
It's funny. I've been wanting to have Casey on the show to have this conversation about bug bounties. Casey and I've actually talked about him coming on the show to talk about it. And I was just thinking today, reading these articles that were involving bug bounties, like, I really need to get Casey in the official system so we reach out and officially ask him to be on the show and not.
He's in the system. The problem is he's in Australia, so you have to set it up ahead of time because for him, this is going to be about. We were on at noon, and it was 2 a.m. for him. Actually, This time might be better for him. It might be like 7 or 8 in the morning.
Right.
Yep. Depending on which coast he's on, he's about 12 to 14 hours ahead.
Yeah, it was 14 hours because it was noon for us and 2 for him. So,
I think the confidentiality thing is really irking to me, especially if there's a bug bounty involved. I think there should be language that is established beforehand, perhaps. I mean, maybe it was an official like bug bounty thing, but like the researcher should know if they discover a vulnerability, roughly what they're going to get paid. And then, like, are they going to be able to talk about it publicly or not? Or is it ever going to come out publicly? And I think that could impact the bug bounty program.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, there's from the researcher's point of view, there's always problems. Sorry, I shouldn't say that. From the researcher's point of view, there's potentially always problems. They've got it's a duplicate bug, we're not paying you. Well, nobody else has reported it. Oh, we just haven't put it in the system yet. There's a lot of several researchers that are complaining about the way that bug bounties are handled by the official or unofficial programs. So I agree with you that things should be laid out ahead of time and kept up to date very, very religiously. Otherwise, you're going to have very pissed off people that are just going to be like, yeah, you know what? Sounds like a 0 day. I'm going to go sell this sucker.
See, I think blockchain could solve this, right? Like if we put this on the blockchain and you report it and it gets recorded as a transaction with, some encryption key at a timestamp, that gets put to the blockchain, and then there's non-repudiation to what's being reported when by who, and that can be validated by third-party sources.
Well, I think you're right, Tyler. I think there needs to be a really good chain of evidence and custody, so to speak. But I also think that there needs to be very clear-cut rules in bug bounties. In a couple of the instances this week even, and in the past, companies try and play with two different variables, right? The amount of time that they have to fix something and the amount of time that they're willing to let go before something becomes public. Sometimes it's changed to never, right? Those need to be established beforehand. How much time you're going to give the vendor to fix it. And I realize that that's not just everyone has 30 days kind of thing. Some people do have that policy, and that's fine. I'm not opposed to it, but I also think there needs to be some exceptions where you can kind of apply for more time to fix it to a certain point. Then there is a hard stop. And then there needs to be a very clear-cut policy about when it becomes public. And maybe that has a couple of tiers as well. But you can't let it go on forever, and you can't change the rules while you're playing the game. You're right.
Wait, you played board games with my 8-year-old?
Yes, it's like playing board games with an 8-year-old, Larry. Absolutely, it is. Because during the I find a bug, I report it, and then they go, well, we want more time. We want more time. We want more time. Well, once we fix it, and then 2 weeks goes by, you can publicly disclose it. But then, after some time goes by, they're like, oh no, wait, you can never disclose this. Like what it's exactly like changing the rules of a board game, playing it with your children.
Yep. And I think that's why using something like Assert is helpful for doing some of that, because they can back you on the, hey, no, you said.
Right.
We heard you. We have witnesses that you said, 2 weeks after this. And, I think that's one of the other hard things, too, about, some of these researchers, especially some of the big companies like Apple. It's like you need to be able to stand your ground and say, no, you said a month. I gave you another 3 months. And then I gave you another 3 months after that. You're done.
But I mean,
you mean like a smart contract that's on a blockchain?
Right.
I knew it.
Wow.
Whoa. Mind blown.
I knew it.
Something like self-validation
Tyler's
right
about
there.
to do smart contracts. I have to preempt that.
Yeah. It's like a quadruple proof
I was-
accounting. Sorry, Lee.
So what's been going through my head with this is that in 2020, DHS put out a requirement for all federal agencies to implement a vulnerability disclosure program, which by September 2022 has to include all federal systems and all agencies. But there's no mention of bug bounty. It's got the reporting, the disclosure, the resolution, the response, no money involved. So I'm thinking, if you have a vulnerability disclosure program and I find a vulnerability, but there's no bounty, what's the incentive to not reveal it?
No, there has to be some. There has to be some incentive, Lee. I agree with
Right.
With,
So
with
that means we got to get Alan Friedman over here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at Binding Operational Directive 20-01 for those of you playing at home, and I'm not finding any mention of money. Now I could be missing it. Please, it's okay. Correct me, but I'm just like,
But
this
it's
is
also
weird.
It's a good point, Lee. And I'm okay with that if they say it's $0. Like, as long as we all know that going in that it's $0, that's fine. But where also a lot of companies play games is, well, that was $10,000, but now it's $5,000, or you may have thought that was a $50,000 payout, but we assessed the severity, and that's only a $5,000 payout. Like, you're playing games. And some of these companies are gigantic. And the difference between $5,000 and $30,000, like, you can go hire a security team to go find all the bugs in your software. Guess what? It's probably going to cost you way more than $30,000, right? So just like pay out the bounty. Like, they seem to be leaning away from supporting the security research and more towards just overly scrutinizing and kind of patronizing the security researchers.
What about if you don't even want monetary?
You get a free.
You need a reprisal, right? Like, you need to be able to have that get out of jail free card. Like, I'm doing you a favor. This is public info. We've done several of those reporting, and it's a little sketchy to even do it. Like, you don't usually use your real name. You brokerage it, or you do it through a persona, because some of those companies. This is a great example, the Missouri one. Like, they don't always treat you very well. Like, if you'd done this through a persona, or they had done this in a different manner, like, maybe the guy wouldn't be in trouble, and that's not a good precedence to set either way.
If you don't want money, you get a free Space Force hat.
I would be good with that.
I would be good with that.
I can make a tinfoil hat at home.
As long as they're disclosing that beforehand, I'm okay with that.
Do they have to report all of the monitoring stuff that they put in said hat?
Yeah. The other point too is, though, I think there's this in my mind there's a notion that, like, once I discover the bug, like, the risk is starting to go up from the point of discovery, because now, like, if I am testing some software, website, or whatever it is, it doesn't matter, right? And I find a vulnerability. Now at least I know there's one person in the world that knows about it. The instant that I disclose that to the vendor, now there's X number of more people that know about this vulnerability. I think it's safe to assume that the longer time goes on, there's even more people that know about the vulnerability, therefore increasing the risk that this information is going to eventually leak out to more and more people the more time goes on. What if there's an insider that is seeing this stuff come through and go, oh wow, like there's a huge 0 day in a Microsoft product, because that never happens. And like the more time goes on, the more people are going to be aware, because the more people have to collaborate to fix that vulnerability, to test the code that's been implemented to fix that vulnerability. Now more people know about it. They talk to their friends. Maybe Russians drop off a few $100,000 at their doorstep, and they're like, hey, I know about this 0 day. Not many other people know about it, but if you're going to drop off a big bag of money on my doorstep, I'll tell you about it, and that's fine. So I think it's in the company's best interest to fix these things as fast as possible, because the more time goes on, potentially the more people are going to know about this vulnerability.
So you mean like Zerodium or the Grok, right?
Yes. I mean, it doesn't matter to the organization, right? The point is that, people talk, and just inherent in the process, more people are going to know about the vulnerability the longer it goes on.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, but the thing is, it does not require tradecraft, any trench coats or funny hats, although I do have the funny hats. But all you really need to do is hit up the Grok on Twitter, and he'll fly you to Thailand if you've got a really good 0 day, or you call Zerodium and they buy it from you with contractual language and taxable income.
But that's a great point, Josh, in the sense that the more time goes on, the more frustrated I am as a researcher, and the more inclined I might be to go, screw it, I'm going to go sell it, right?
Yep. It's legal to do so to Zerodium.
Right.
Like it's just literally that simple. They'll be like, here's a contract, sign it, we'll give you a check. You have to pay taxes on that because it's a legal transaction.
Right. Can I go sell it to Iran? I know.
Not unless you want to run.
There was a couple of weeks ago where there is case law now, right? That I can't sell weapons to known enemies of the state, and that could be considered a weapon, right? So
nothing to Larry.
Right. Enemies.
You can't sell it to me, but you can give it to me for free.
I think in that case you can't give it. I don't think you can give it away. You give it away.
Export laws
either, right? Export laws come into play. But to Josh's point, if you want to sell it to an organization that's their business and they buy it and it's all above board and on book, I can do that.
You could just conveniently leave it on this unhackable system connected to the internet,
right?
And I'll go get it myself. It's fine, right?
Yeah, disclosure. I think it's fascinating that so many of our stories talk about disclosure.
Yeah, this week
and it's something we've been talking about for 16 years, and there's still so many nuances. So let's talk about.
And to make this even better, I think maybe even to segue into some of your stories, that in the 16-year history, we talked about a lot about one particular company and their disclosure.
Yes,
and that they fucked it up.
Johnny Cash, David Maynard, right? Still sticks in my mind to this day.
They got wireless driver vulnerability. They got way better, and now they're back fucking it up again.
Because there is yet another researcher, Tokarev. What's his full name? I need to get better at putting the person's full name.
Which story of this is yours?
Because part of the problem is attribution. But also recognizing the security researcher, which is why sometimes I feel bad that I copy a quote, for our notes. Yep. And Dennis Tokarev is the person that found multiple vulnerabilities in it was iOS, Apple iOS, and so I mean there's the whole timeline, right, that happened. So in total, Dennis found 4 iOS 0-day exploits, reported them to Apple between March and May 4th, I believe, of this year. In September, he published the proof of concept exploit code and details on all iOS vulnerabilities after the company, one, failed to credit him after patching one of the vulnerabilities in July, but also asked him never to speak of them ever again. Which again goes back to my previous points of there should be some rules of engagement about how much money I'm getting paid, how it would be attributed, and when or if these vulnerabilities should be publicly disclosed by the researcher and or the vendor. All that shit should be worked out beforehand. Apple's changing the rules as they go. And I really think Apple, especially being a large tech giant, is just shooting itself in the foot. Like, how much effort would it take to, first of all, credit the researcher?
Yep.
Like, why not credit the researcher? Like, what's the motivation for not crediting the researcher? Like, properly disclose those vulnerabilities. Microsoft does it. Google does it. Like, what's the harm? We're already talking about them. Now you've pissed off the researchers so much that they're publicly disclosing them. Like, why not like have a nice process for that? Why have this like shit show of a public relations issue when you don't have to deal with the fact? Okay, and then we make software. We had vulnerabilities. Like, everyone that creates software has vulnerabilities. We get it, Apple. It's okay. Like, you can tell us that you have software vulnerabilities. We're going to be cool with that. We're not going to trash you for having software. Well, maybe not as bad.
I think we hit a nerve.
Oh, dude, it's because we talked about this with Patrick Wardle. Right, we talked about it with Patrick Wardle. Yep. We've talked about it with so many, and not just specific people, but it's also been disclosed in the press that pretty much every researcher that is finding and disclosing vulnerabilities in Apple products has a bad experience, is kind of the vibe I'm getting. Like, they've all had a bad experience in some way. And I just think it's more damaging for Apple to hide under the veil of secrecy and treat researchers like crap than it would be for them to just own up and go, yeah, there was a vulnerability. This nice person found it and disclosed it for us. Like, good for them. Like, thank them and pay them, and, part of their program and pay them some money. And then say this was the vulnerability, and that this is how we fixed it. Like, what's the issue? Why? I don't get it.
Now, some of the things that I've got weird, that is very strange here, and I wish I knew the way that things are stitched together. After he posted the stuff to his blog about the 0 days and posted the code, Apple said, "Yeah, sorry, we saw your blog. Sorry, we're still investigating some of these and how we can address them to protect our customers." Yet they had already patched some of them and not giving them credit.
Right.
The other question that I've got is, like, did he like completely waive off their vulnerability disclosure program? Because one of these that he reported was $100,000 payment from their bug bounty program. Could be $100,000 program until they change the rules.
Until they change the rules and go, no, we're only going to pay you $10,000. Thank you very much.
It'll I bet, I don't want to bet, and I don't know the whole story here, but I conjecture that one of the bugs that was fixed was the $100,000 one that they didn't credit him for, which he then published, and they'll say, no, you published this outside of the bug bounty, we're not giving you the money. That would not surprise me in the least.
I mean, $100,000 to Apple is like a dollar, a quarter, like pocket change to us, right?
Yeah, found it landing on the sidewalk,
right? But also, they didn't have to employ a full-time employee to work and find these. Like, you got the results without incurring any of the overhead. Pay the bug bounty.
Yeah,
and I mean, let's be frank, finding one, let alone 4 0 days in iOS is an amazing feat. I mean, I think we can all agree that that's a pretty amazing feat.
Yeah.
Bloody hell, yes.
Ah, I'm fired up.
Hey, where's that bourbon over there?
I
need a refill. You have it over there.
Anyway.
Give the man with the fangs the bourbon. Come on.
But so also I find it interesting. So in this whole my soapbox thing, now I'm going to rant even more. I mean, not only like are these companies, sorry, here's the bourbon, pour me some too while I'm talking. Well, I'm going to continue to rant because now, we're changing the rules about how it's disclosed, when it's disclosed, who is credited, how much is paid. The other thing is they may just decide to sue you for it too. Like, you throw that into the whole mix. And there is, where is my story?
Where you go?
A consortium that is, did I delete the story by accident?
No, don't say you did.
I might have deleted the story by accident because there is an initiative to prevent researchers, thank you, Larry, from being sued. So they're looking to, and I might have deleted. So this came from the Register. So 0 Day Hunters are seeking laws to prevent vendors from suing them from doing their jobs. So the Cybersecurity Advisors Network, a Paris-based body that represents InfoSec pros, has created a new working group to advocate for legislation that stops vendors from suing when researchers show them zero-day bugs in their software. Now, this is interesting because as much as I want to rant about Apple and other vendors that are doing heinous things with their bug bounty programs and in disclosure, this is like, how do you differentiate a legitimate security researcher trying to do responsible disclosure on a bug from a criminal or someone with other kinds of intent in a law, right? That could get that's kind of a slippery slope. Like if you pass a law that says software companies cannot sue an individual or company because they have discovered a zero-day or flaw or vulnerability in their software, how do you put language in there to like prevent a use case where it is kind of in the vendor's best interest to stop someone from disclosing a flaw? I mean, let's be frank, there are instances of this for the greater good and public safety where you may not want that to happen and you may have to take legal action in order to prevent that. So that's kind of one where I'm a little softer on.
Doesn't this sound a lot like what happened with a few years ago with I'm going to say it wrong, the Wassenaar Treaty, when they were trying to add things like Metasploit and other research/hacker tools to it as basically being weapons?
Yeah, like what's a hacker tool, right? Like,
yeah,
you know, you can't have Bash on your system because that could be used as a hacker tool.
Yeah, you know, and isn't that open source tooling as well? I mean, come on, open source tools are evil.
Evil.
Clearly.
Yeah. Closed source all the way.
Old man boomer.
Wow.
Most definitely.
I couldn't resist, Neil Lee. I'm sorry.
It's
yeah,
okay.
I just, I think that
boomer.
one's, I mean, I applaud the efforts, but I think it's a slippery slope. I think we should work to find a way to like take off the table that if a legitimate security researcher, you have to define what that is, right? Discovers a vulnerability. Problem is you got to define what that is. That the vendor can't sue them, right?
How do you, if you get caught hacking, then like you just claim you're doing research as a security researcher, right. And then do we have to get like the PI license where we have to certify as
you have to be a licensed security researcher, right? And then how do you prevent criminals from becoming licensed security researchers? Like there's a whole rabbit hole that you can go down. Again, I applaud the efforts. Based on my previous rant, obviously I really like this initiative, but I think it's going to be a tough one to get through.
Didn't Tyler say that's all better with blockchain?
Yes, blockchain solves all of the problems.
Blockchain is fixing the world.
So,
I did have that story. Sorry, that story was my story number 2.
Okay. Well, there it is. Okay. So, I was actually wondering if you wanted to talk about something a little less
serious.
Well, I do, but I also think that my story number 16, another story about my favorite story of the week, the high school student that hacked IoT devices and Rickroll an entire school district, that also ties into disclosure. Mm-hmm. Now, I am very happy that this had a happy ending. Right? This is
because we all know you like happy endings.
This is like I'm really glad, really bad. Like at the end of this movie, that it was a happy ending, because the alternate ending could have been really, really ugly. And we've just covered cases where the ending is not so happy in a lot of these other movies or stories.
And admittedly, he was smart, and that he said right in the article that he automatically sent the report to the security, the IT security group. And didn't schedule the meeting to sit down with them face to face until after he had graduated and received his diploma.
This student, I want to hire this person. This person has a shining career in information security. Just throwing that out there. He didn't work alone. I don't know if it's a he or she, but they did not work alone, because I don't think he disclosed he or she did not disclose their identity.
Yes, they did.
They did.
He mentioned some of their handles, but he didn't disclose their names. He wasn't working alone, but man, I want to grab that whole team.
I don't know if it was a he or she or that doesn't matter. I don't think the person disclosed their name or identity. Is that correct? They're still posting under. We'll call him White Hood Hacker. Is the handle? I could have
sworn that no. I could have sworn that
if they listed their name, I'm more than happy to give them credit because.
Terribly sorry. What was the handle?
White Hood Hacker.
That's terrifying.
Well, I think it's a metaphor for like white hat, black hat, hackers wear hoodies kind of thing.
So you go to the blog entry, you click home. Hi, I'm Min. I do cybersecurity. I'm an 18-year-old security researcher studying computer science at the University of Illinois.
I didn't click home. Okay. Min, you're awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. Well, and I'm glad. But the other guys and gals who were with him, he just listed them as further colors. He had he had purple, red, and green as from the 3 other high schools, but did not give their names out.
Right, because they did not want to be included in the debrief.
I do want to point out, like
his Twitter picture is the Cyber Patriot shirts. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, like other. There's a lot to the story. So I'll start with the kind of technical details. That Min noticed that there were lots of vulnerabilities in the AV media system. Calls out very specific vendors and 3 different products inside of this externity AV media players, Avidia player, Avidia stream, Avidia server. Discovered lots of vulnerabilities on there.
I'd say 3 different components of the same system.
Right. Web interfaces, SSH servers, enumerated vulnerabilities, did a lot of network scanning.
Default credentials.
And it sounded like these...
Insecure password, insecure credential storage.
Right. And these AV or media players were part of an architecture that went across the entire school district. I think you said 10,000... 11,000 students in this particular school district, and realized these were all interconnected. And then had this idea that they were going to essentially Rickroll everyone in the school district. But, I mean, this was a very well thought out and very well crafted and coordinated attack, which was... I think it really exemplifies the impact when you can do this type of exercise and test, which Min did without permission, which is why I don't like when people do this without permission. I get very nervous, and I don't recommend it. It was a very happy ending, but it was done without permission. But so it basically. Constructed this attack and designed this attack where essentially by compromising these devices, installing a custom script on them, which required testing. So what Min had to do was basically log into a computer that was in a classroom, I would assume is from the picture, that had a webcam on it.
It was the security cameras.
Was it the security camera or PC? I couldn't tell from the article.
I think it was the security system.
So he had like live video footage being streamed back to him while he hacked into the AV system and did his testing while classes were not going on. So the classroom is dark.
Yep. Sorry. I would connect to one of the PCs in the computer lab with a front-facing camera.
With a front-facing camera, so he could see the projector that was in the room that he was connected to, and then was testing the script because he didn't have this, equipment. In his house, he had to remotely go into the school on a PC with a webcam and then hack into the AV system that was projecting on the wall and send it commands and try and figure it out and hack it and go, okay, I can play, basically construct it so that they could play a movie. Okay. I mean, there's a lot more other technical details in the article as well. But what I also found was amazing, which many of us have done in pen tests, like how do I exemplify these vulnerabilities without... 1, doing damage to systems, and 2, disrupting any school activities. They were extremely aware. They're like, we don't want this to happen during exams. We don't want this to happen during class time. We don't want anything to be impacted in the school system. So they coordinated the attack after like the bell rang or like when the bell was going to ring. So classes were over. took over the AV system, ran a countdown simultaneously. I don't know how many devices played this, but it was at full volume. Also, they kind of took into account if the device was turned off, it would actually turn back on and crank the volume up to full and rickrolled everyone in the entire school district simultaneously.
And 45 seconds before it started, not only did they turn the device on, they made sure that the input was set to the correct input source.
Like, I just unbelievable planning. Amazing, but also ensured that like nothing was damaged. They removed the script when they were done. Nothing was damaged. Nothing was impacted. Again, it was after classes, not while exams were going on, and executed this attack. Wrote up an entire full report, shared that with the school district. To the school district credit, they were not expelled, and no criminal charges were pressed. And they even did a Zoom call, right, with the school district and explained in detail everything that they found, all of their findings, and how to fix the vulnerability. Man, just like hats off. Again, my only concern is that, I mean, that they might have tried to press charges, but knowing what little I know about the CFAA and in Title 18, how would you prove damages? Like they didn't. Students were singing and teachers were dancing. Like how are you going to prove damages? Like, oh, you made everyone sing and dance, therefore you're evil and cause damage. And
I think maybe that they took it in very good heart, along the lines of the senior prank
kind of thing.
That arguably many other senior pranks that I've heard of have caused significantly more damage.
Maybe not even using computers, right? It was like shaving cream and stuff when I was in junior high.
Maybe the Missouri governor should go talk to the school board.
No.
Right?
Some heads need to roll,
And allegedly he found there were 2 additional 0 days with the media players that he did not release as part of this, and I would hope that he's going through some ethical disclosure.
Right, and hopefully not getting sued by the vendor.
Yep.
And hopefully he's being treated nicely by the vendor.
This kid is a freshman in college. He's already got his OSCP.
Yep.
Wow.
Let's put it this way. When I found this during someone was sent this.
He has an interview with in Guardians?
He actually he does not, because we've respected his rights to go to college and earn himself a degree. But certainly after he graduates, we'd be interested in speaking with him. I do know of at least one other person that was in that community that it was released has already reached out to him and is potentially already offering him a job.
Oh, it's awesome.
And
awesome.
The joke came up because the comments were, we need to get this guy in Larry's IoT hacking course.
Yeah.
So, might be a thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, just my favorite, one of my favorite stories we've covered in.
Yep. If nothing else, it's going to get used as a case study in the course.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Yep. Yeah, and again, like, if Min had asked for permission, like, let's just play this. Like in classic, like what if, Marvel kind of style. What if Min had asked for permission? I don't think the story would have ended. Like if Min had gone and said, like, hey, I want to rickroll the entire district, and I'm going to do it in a safe way, they probably would have said no. And would they have really fixed all the vulnerabilities? Like this was so impactful, but in such a positive way. I mean, it showed the vulnerabilities with an impact that was very visible. I mean, you could see and hear, and really, really feel the impact of this particular vulnerability that I think really led to compelling the school district to go, we really want to fix these things. If he had said, well, like I found that, you've got this issue with SSH or whatever, they might have been like, they're not so motivated to fix it.
Well, here's the thing.
I mean, bother me.
This is also a kid that is a good kid. They're not like this kid has been leading teams in CTFs for years there. He's been, I had to put the background on because
I love the background. It's great.
He led teams in CTF for years. He led the Cyber Patriot and the First Robotics teams. This is one of those kids that the administration was like, Min did it? All right.
Right.
Yep. Min and his buddies did it? Yeah.
He had already established himself as a leader in the community, to your point,
exactly.
Josh. Right.
Reputation preceded him.
Yeah.
Yep.
Exactly.
That said, it was still illegal.
That too, yes.
Not arguing that point.
Nope.
Yeah, I mean technically, but you'd also have to prove damages.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the point that I come back to.
Well,
is that
I mean, CFAA,
it does require you prove damages, though.
But what was it? Computer trespass? Like he accessed the system without permission?
Sure, but did he steal data? No. Did
Wait.
He was authorized in that system because he did some AV work in the school. I read that in one of his posts.
Interesting.
So he actually did not perform a CFAA violation.
But did he steal data? Technically, I would argue that he did because he discovered that one of the systems had a list of passwords.
He was authorized.
Was he, though?
The Moran case.
Was he authorized for that system?
Doesn't matter. There's no gateways. There's no gates in place. Sorry. Doesn't matter. The new interpretation of the CFAA, as per I think it's the Moran case that just happened, or the Van Buren case, something like that, like literally just happened a few weeks ago. If there's not an actual gate, virtual or physical, in front of the information you want protected, sorry.
Yeah, no, we talked about that.
Okay.
We talked about that. I think that was the Van Buren case. Yeah,
but technically there was a gate. It was a username and password.
That's not technically considered a gate.
Is HTML considered a gate?
Wow.
It's only a programming language for Larry.
Wow. I'm just saying if Min has to go to court on this, there's an attorney that I don't even think it's going to trial in my opinion.
He's not going to trial.
He's not going to trial.
No.
This is dismissed. Because he didn't cause damages. How are they going to prove damages? Still to prove damages.
They didn't even try. They didn't even charge him. So there's no case to dismiss.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's interesting. You look at Missouri, and they said they did want to press charges with a lesser, in my mind, a lesser offense.
Yeah,
but you could prove damages there.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, Larry. It is a good point.
Can you prove damages though if it?
I got a boogie. Public? Sorry, guys.
Thanks, Josh.
Thank you, Josh.
Bye, Josh.
Have a good night.
He's probably gonna blow his nose. He's got a boogie.
I mean,
sorry, Lee.
No, I wanted to switch stories when we were done.
I think we're done.
Yeah, I think we're done.
Because I got a lot of interesting stories, but the one that kind of got me was my number 5, where they were talking about, over 60s being targeted. I didn't like the article because it was kind of commercial for products, but I was looking at it and going, do those guys know the basics, about having good endpoint protection and, how to defend themselves, without you becoming their go-to phone call whenever anything goes bump in the night on their computer. Mm-hmm. And looking at it from that perspective, I was thinking, we should be, the seniors in our lives, we should be getting them basic cyber hygiene. And if you're not sure what that means, that article can give you a starting point.
No, it's a great point, Lee, because in that age demographic, those are folks that didn't grow up with the technology that, if you were born after a certain time, you grew up with computers and the internet.
Yep. Yeah. So, I think about, how susceptible some of our parents are to some of that type of stuff. Like I think about, my mother-in-law who got a new computer because her old one wasn't working. There was something wrong with her browser. I don't even want to know. I can probably guess, but there was something wrong with her browser. So she just went out and bought a new computer, but she couldn't remember her password for her Facebook account. So she created a new one.
Right.
This is the type of level of sophistication, but not realizing that she could remember the password to her email, which she could have used Facebook to send her a password reset to her email. But instead, she created a new account.
Again, it's folks that didn't grow up with technology.
Yep, agreed.
Obviously not everyone, but majority didn't. Yep. If you didn't work in the field, right, or have that as a hobby, you didn't grow up with technology. So.
Right. I'm avoiding making Lee jokes here.
Well, yeah.
But Lee's in the camp that Lee, you worked in technology and tinkered with technology when you were.
I'm also going to say he's not 60 either.
No, not yet.
I love you, man.
That's no problem. Actually, I was actually thinking about that. That was part of mine. It's like, wait, That's not. Wait a minute. But then, like I said, I took the higher path and said, you know what? It's sometimes hard when the phone rings and it's a friend or a relative. It's like, what advice do you give them?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I took this one. Is like, hey,
Right.
this is a good starting point.
Absolutely.
But the threats that the older generations, have maybe thought about or been involved with didn't necessarily involve computers, right? They involved telephones, perhaps. They involved physical security, perhaps. Larry, I'm listening to Code Girls.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to the part where they kind of like glossed over it briefly, but it was in obviously the 1940s, right? And
they discussed some stuff a little earlier, but it's mostly focused around the early 1940s.
And in early 1940s, someone went through, I believe it was Arlington Hall, where they were doing much of the code breaking.
Yep.
And like did a physical pen test essentially of Arlington Hall.
Yeah, it was like for a week.
Yeah, and like got badges and walked into places and stole sensitive documents, and these were the places where they were breaking the Japanese and German. Largely, they talk about Japanese codes being broken in Arlington Hall, and they had a physical pen test. And I'm like, wow, that was a thing back in the 40s, right? So that's the kind of security that. Not that the 40s is the generation we're talking about, right? But necessarily, but the older generations are used to the internet and computers and browsers and passwords in that nature is still new, not stuff that they grew up with, in other words.
And admittedly, some of those folks were, maybe a little bit more technologically advanced, and even without the technology. So much of their work was done in their mind and or paper,
right?
To start, that like they got that things can go horribly wrong, and like it's an amazing story. I think much of it is going over our 8-year-old's head, and maybe even some of it over the 14-year-old's head. But I'm listening
some of it
to
over my head when they talk about how they break the codes. And Jeff Mann and I had this conversation that I want Jeff has not read the book yet. But I want Jeff to read the book, and I want to do a segment on it specifically on like exactly how they were breaking those codes.
Like
it's hard for me because we're listening to it.
The additives,
and it was like a checksum, right? The first 3 digits were the code, but the 4th digit was the sum of the first three.
First 3 and then added together. So like another additive, and the code groups, and the crib sheets.
That's another. Yes. Which all stuff, and when it's just funny to us is kind of foreign.
It's foreign, but it's not.
Yes.
You think about like
it's kind of like assault, but it's not really assault kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think it's more confusing if you've studied more of the modern cryptographic systems. I think you're even more confused, right?
Yeah.
It's a great book. Our listeners have heard both of us talk about it. I think it's a must read would you say it's a must read for folks in our field, Nairi?
I would. And if nothing else, to understand the importance of a more diverse workforce, especially then.
Huge point. About diversity is addressed, but also diversity is a very important factor and really shines a light on that. But it also shines a light on we complained we couldn't get toilet paper in the pandemic. When you look at what was happening in World War II, like they couldn't get things like shampoo. In a whole bunch of items, and so we have nothing to complain about that. Maybe there was a little bit of a toilet paper shortage.
Yeah, like
give me a break.
You had to ration sugar,
like food, meats, the whole thing.
Yep.
And we talk about food shortages today, but you can still go to the grocery store and get
there's stuff on the shelves,
right?
But it may not be what you want to eat.
Yes,
but
exactly.
it's something you can eat.
Well, watching TikTok and your Facebook.
Yeah,
shorts,
exactly, on your iPhone, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Your Story 13 or Mystery Snail or any of the APT ones this week are good.
I did not. I read some of these articles, but I didn't dig in. So my story number 7 was a use of. I didn't cover that one. Was a use after free vulnerability in Excel, but there was another one. It was threat posts breakdown of the 4 0-day bugs in this patch Tuesday. The first of which they covered was the Mystery Snail in exploiting the Win32K bug. I read it, but I didn't prepare enough to be able to talk about it in detail. Therefore, I'm relying on my illustrious crew to fill in details.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's leveraging a kernel level driver that's often targeted, but this one's very interesting in how it's actually leveraging user API calls. It's a use after free in memory that allows you to jump from an unallocated spot in memory that calls unintended or unallocated user land or user functions that then allow you to jump back to the rest of kernel level. So there's a bunch of privilege escalation here that is hard to do in Windows, and the fact that they released 4 of them. This isn't just one. This is 4 that's part of an ongoing operation by Iron Husky, which is an APT group kind of out of China. They can attribute this because of other infrastructure that's been used in the past, all the way back to 2012. This is actually the first time that some of this code and some of these rats have been, we'll say, that have been publicly disclosed. Like, they've been tracking this actor for a while. So some of this infrastructure's been known. Some of the code's been known, but they're just releasing this as kind of a public service on what's Iron Husky up to, what rat they're using, and some of the sophistication that they're building into their toolkit. So this is 4.0 days in an otherwise, I wouldn't call this a super sophisticated nation state one. They seem to jump from target to target, very politically charged, and that has some, infrastructure sharing has some implications. That means it's probably not one of their higher level, more sophisticated actors that is trying to maintain, long-term stealth. So there's some interesting things in this release, especially with 4.0 days at this level.
It's interesting.
And this is in Windows 10. Like, what does this affect?
Yeah.
Well, this affects everything. Windows 10. This one, I would assume this one, if you rewrote how the pointers were jumping, this would probably affect Windows 7 as well.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That they found it. I mean, it underscores how the use after free can kind of hide in there, right?
And it's
a very well documented bug. I mean, we can trace use after free. I mean, probably pretty far back, right? I mean, it's been in some of the more popular books that I started reading on software security, right? It's very well documented. The fact that it still exists in Windows just kind of, underscores the problem that we have with Windows in the number of lines of code and the number of opportunities there are to find vulnerabilities still to this day.
I think Tyler had some very interesting choice of words in describing some of this, in that it was a very interesting and a very complex path to follow with the Tyler, from what I'm sort of gathering with the multiple jumps, but used by a threat actor that is not particularly sophisticated.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, this has to be built into a toolkit, I would imagine, where they're reusing infrastructure and or IP space that's dating back to 2012. Like, even bad pen test companies have a little bit better OPSEC than that in some cases.
But the exploit and the vulnerability, was that just added back into this toolkit in that infrastructure? So they were like, oh, we have this infrastructure, but we bought this 0 day from someone who was really smart and found it, right?
That's probably my guess, is either they've bought that, or it's been included as part of an exploit kit where you're leveraging, say, something like a PHP code to do the injection, where you buy the exploit, and the exploit kit is separate from even the post-exploitation kit, which is also separate from the kernel rootkit driver that's usually installed next to your post-exploitation kit. That's typically how a good actor should work. So the fact that they got a couple 0 days in there, they've probably been dropping some coin on that. The Microsoft SharePoint, Microsoft Exchange pieces that were in here are much more interesting, where you have something like SharePoint, which everything on Teams is backed by SharePoint. Anytime you create a team in SharePoint, that's a backed website. Anytime you drop files in there or make a sub-channel with inside of a team, those are all different SharePoint websites. So this one seems a lot more interesting to me from a kind of dangerous standpoint, as well as the Exchange one. Anything that's still exposed from an Exchange standpoint also applies to some of the O365 And there's still a lot of on-prem exchange that companies have not given up, and that's usually exposed to the internet. So a few of these have a little bit bigger implication than I would say even that one.
The article says internal SharePoint servers. Is this exploit like valid on Azure as well? Like in O365?
So if you get creds, if you have access or authorization and you get creds and you land inside the network, or you're on a application that has application passwords or API access to something like SharePoint via, call it Teams, then that's obviously an exposed SharePoint. Like usually that requires credentials. When they say internal versus external, that just means the SharePoint isn't exposed to the internet. But if you have credentials, then via our magic SSO and SAS and all of the other magic things that are now happening in that arena, now exposes that internal SharePoint to external just with a pair of creds. So I'm not sure what they're meaning exactly by that.
That's really interesting. And Microsoft is really, I mean, they're good with researchers for the most part, right?
Yeah.
And the fact that someone was like, "Hey, I've got some 0 days, and I'm gonna sell them." Yeah, I mean, it's not because Microsoft it's not because Microsoft's treating researchers badly that they're not going to disclose it to Microsoft. I mean, they're just maybe a nation state had a team that found it or whatever. Maybe they didn't, buy it off of research. I mean, they could have, right? But
well, anytime because Windows is so complex, you start to think about Active Directory, Azure, SharePoint, Teams, all the integrations between all those, single sign-on, Azure Sync, the connect back for federation, ADFS, like all of these things that are tying together for Microsoft. Anytime you put a magnifying glass at a particular area you're looking at with inside of Microsoft or a Microsoft product, you almost always can find something to fall out. Now, it may not always be this, 7.8 or 8 point, whatever this is, where you're getting RC directly, but something like Privesk or the ability to do interesting things or look at something later with inside of a Windows application or Microsoft application, that almost always happens. So it's just people taking the time to look at it, maybe purchasing it, maybe not. Maybe they just have a team that's focused on
it. The other interesting thing to me here is that the security profile of your locally on-premise versus the hosted cloud versions of those, where you read these and it's like Microsoft or Oracle or whoever says, we got this in our cloud, we're taking care of it, but we've got it on-prem like Hybrid Exchange or other products, you're toast. And it's becoming some of this is like, why host this yourself anymore? I mean, yeah, you could still screw it up, but it seems like the bar is a little lower to get it right. And, stop insourcing everything, guys. Let's get the people who have the resources to keep on top of this shit and keep it patched.
It seems like, Lee, to your point, a few years ago, we were talking a lot about migrating your Microsoft infrastructure. I'll use a blanket term and say Microsoft infrastructure, off to the cloud was like a big thing. And we don't talk about that so much anymore. Is that because there's like we reached a tipping point where a certain percentage of large enterprises or even small to medium enterprises have migrated everything off or most things off into
or those that
Microsoft's
are going to migrate have already?
Yeah.
I would say the migration is so hybrid right now that you have those that have migrated off, you have those that have migrated off and come back. And most of the corporations you found have migrated a portion of that off, come back and scaled where they're running a hybrid in a manner that makes a lot more sense. They've seen the cost, they've seen some of the, I would say, hardships and operational issues, and now they've kind of scaled to a point where, they probably have O365 and Teams hosted in Azure. They probably have some federation with accounts being synced back and forth in a hybrid, but they're still maintaining Active Directory and DNS internally, while having some of those functions kind of back and forth where it makes sense.
You're hitting what's manageable now. You can keep your arms around it. But you have to watch for what you're still insourcing. Those, sacred cows in the corner that really shouldn't be there anymore.
We all have those.
Oh, hell yeah.
We do, right? It's the elephant in the room. We all have those. and not just in Microsoft environments, right? We all have those.
Oh yeah,
those things. I saw there was a CISA alert.
you should pass the ice first.
On I'm going to pass the ice, which is water, which is very relevant to our story, Larry.
You're still not passing the hard water.
We need water and ice. I don't know what I did with it.
Here it is.
Oh, you have it. So the FBI,
He already passed it.
FBI,
Yep.
CISA, EPA, and NSA recommend water facilities, including DoD water treatment facilities in the United States and abroad, use a risk-informed analysis to determine the applicability of a range of technical and non-technical mitigations to prevent, detect, and respond to cyber threats, because they have basically observed, and you can read the CISA alert, they basically said, like, hackers be hacking and they're targeting water systems. And they have this whole list that follows that statement that I just read of all these things you should do if you're a water treatment facility. And I'm like, well, that's good. I'm not going to downplay that's good, but like that's way easier said than done.
and arguably about 6
we been
years
saying
too
that?
late. Like, didn't we have attacks on water treatment facilities like 6 years ago?
At
Like-
least.
I mean, there was alerts
like-
after September 11th about poisoning the water system. Not so much cyber attacks, but more so
Physical.
I think they were warning about physical attacks back
Yep.
then.
But I know we've seen attacks against, and we've talked about them on the show within 6 years about, and you know, I have to say 6 years. It was probably 10, not really, but I'm finding that for me, when I say, "Oh man, that was just like yesterday," that yesterday was 5, 6, 7 years ago. Like, thank you, Facebook
So,
memories.
The elephant in the room here, I think, is does it matter if these have been this bad for the last 6 years and you're an advanced nation state trying to maintain control over something that you may need to leverage in the future for kinetic damage? Would you not already be in those environments, and do the mitigations actually help boot an actor that's got that deep and had that much time with inside of an environment or network?
yeah, I mean, you could boot, but are you really booting them all the way out? If they've got enough time, I mean, most of us know this, right?
Couple days, just a few hours.
I mean, to gain a foothold and maintain a foothold is not, I mean, all that difficult depending on the sophistication of the systems and their defenses. You know, okay, so now you're hyper aware, but you're really booting them out completely. How do you know?
Like they should be doing these things. Like, don't get me wrong. I think you're right. The guidance is well thought out and needs to be done. Like, this is something we've all been saying. Like, I don't see anything new here, but are we too late in critical infrastructure that we need to be doing this differently? Like, that's kind of the thought process, I think, in a few of the camps that have seen a lot of really nefarious things. So I don't know.
It's concerning that they've observed, and by they, FBI, CISA, Environmental Protection Agency, NSA, have collaborated together to say, we've observed both known and unknown threat actors in these systems. To me, that's kind of concerning. Say what you will about history, but for them to release this alert with that, you know, that even that level of details, like, very concerning.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I look at it and say, you know, we've had a lot of news in the last year or so about critical infrastructure under attack. And there's been a lot of advice, some just from CISA, a lot of collaborative advice, you know, getting a lot of agencies involved. A statement like that feels like a, look, guys, pay attention, take a look here. I guess I'm thinking they're trying to get the attention of the people that need to respond, because they can't just, you know, walk up one-on-one and grab them by the throat. But I look at those, I always say, you know, if you're in this, even if you're not doing water treatment. There's stuff you could use for your general cyber you may not have thought of. Take a look at these. They've got some good ideas. You don't have to adopt them all, but look for gaps. Here's a guide. I mean, you could throw the whole thing out if you want, but there might be something you missed.
There's likely something you missed. Not there might be. There is definitely something you missed. Yeah, there's definitely something you missed. Yeah, I again, I come back to, maybe tooting my own horn a little bit. I can't remember how many years ago it was, but I was interviewed by CBS Sunday Morning about Dan Rather's new book. It's been out 5 years. His book, Lights Out, about attacks against the nation's critical infrastructure and so forth. And some of the feedback that both I got and Dan Rather got about his book, like, this is a completely unrealistic scenario. This will never happen. Our government and our critical infrastructure is so well protected. And I took the completely other stance 5-6 years ago when I was being interviewed. And I think if you go back and watch that episode, I will say, if you don't think that they're already in our systems, you're deluding yourself. And if you don't already think we're in theirs, you're also deluding yourself. I think it's a little bit of a two-way street here.
I think there's a standoff, that's happening. There's certainly a lot of speculation, some evidence, certainly, mostly speculation, that we're all in each other's systems. Yeah, and it's a standoff. Shut off our water supply, and we'll shut off yours.
Yep.
It could be as simple as that. I mean, it's interesting how, similar to like IoT hacking and stuff, is that these systems are so disparate and so different and managed by different groups. And there's lots of different technology that it's not like there's one common denominator that could lead to like this catastrophic failure. That it's frightening that some of the resilience is in the ubiquity of the systems.
Yeah, and I think also too is that I think so many folks that are implementing these systems, and I think there are a couple of the critical infrastructure groups that have gotten it. That my approach to the IoT,
I think Power is certainly hyper aware and has made huge strides.
And to the
Tyler, Larry, I mean, you guys agree?
Agreed.
Power's made some strides.
Agreed. But again, I still think there are definite groups within the power industry and others that fail to recognize the gravity of the situation. I think the big thing that we included as part of the IoT course for SANS that we wrote was that the IOTA method that we've talked about in the past that never really got written, but this is as close as you're going to get, is that IoT and these connected systems are not a device. It's a part of something greater. You're going to have a system that connects to it, controls it, reports data somewhere. You've got those systems that take that data and they populate other systems. And you've got maybe stuff on the back end that with multiple vendors and the cloud and your mobile app. This is all part of it. And I think there's so many points where these groups and these verticals forget that it's not just about these one or two devices. It's this whole ecosystem. So.
But I think that's been evolving over the past 20, 30 years, right?
Sure.
20, 30 years ago, we got to go protect the system. Now we have to protect the ecosystem. What's interesting is that Power we agreed, has made some strides. Could that be one of the reasons why water is coming under scrutiny? We certainly talked about the Florida water attack and other attacks, and how when we dig in and we start peeling back the layers of the onion, that these water systems are not federally controlled. Some are, and some that support the federal government, but they're not necessarily state controlled. Maybe they're not county controlled. Maybe it's a private system, but it's like a mixed bag across it.
And there are still that in the power industry.
Yeah,
and arguably they had more focus. And I would argue, Paul, you and I have been on a very much a nostalgia kick on some of our reading material that ICS and the power industry were not the first. The phone company was.
Phone company was.
Yep. Yeah. The phone company was critical infrastructure.
Yeah.
So.
I see cellular companies being the next big power grid target. Like, you start taking down some of the cellular backup networks, some of the CDMA, LTE, You look at our S7 communication.
Yeah.
That's an
So
very
it's
old
funny you
protocol.
say that, Tyler. Sorry to interrupt, but I did my story number 9 is an overview of SS7 signaling.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's a decent overview. Yeah, and some how SS7 works, and also some of the attacks against it. To your point of what if you were to target cellular and communications networks?
Did you guys? And I haven't been here in a couple weeks. Did you guys cover that story about the data breach for that provider and the SS7 stuff?
Yes, we did.
We did.
Yes.
Great.
That good Lord.
Yeah. Huh.
That's a good word for it.
Yeah.
Yep.
I agree, though that falls under critical infrastructure today.
Mm-hmm.
It is now, yeah. Like you start and you take that one step further, and you go into psyops. What does it take to actually manipulate a society in order to cause monetary harm and or panic? You take away internet, and you start to mess with people's critical infrastructure and their ability to get to their money.
It's
Both those
interesting,
things
Tyler,
happen.
when we think about September 11th, one of the things that I think we don't often remember or maybe talk about was how the cellular and telecommunications infrastructure was impacted. There was like physical damage to some of that infrastructure based on the attacks, but also a like self-inflicted denial of service attack,
distributed denial
of service attack that like we couldn't call each other because everything was flooded in all at once.
Everybody calling everybody to check in.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then you have the ripple effect. You've got stock market starting to crash. You've got Bitcoin, people pulling money out of banks physically, and you end up coin shortage. You end up with food and supply chain attacks where it's just literally overwhelming the local economy that then overwhelms the distribution. So the ripple effect of even minor events and the ability to plan around those and correlate what that means from a critical infrastructure standpoint starts to get into some stuff that is a little bit terrifying as far as how fragile the system is, even based on just hearsay or rumor, not even things happening. You start to bring in kinetics and what happens around the psyops of the general public, of people that, again, have a 15-second attention span, and once they remove a few things or they have their friends tell them something from TikTok, like that's becoming a very, very bad situation at a scale that we can't even anticipate.
It's amazing how much security is about resiliency. And a lot of it comes down to the prepper. You were big in the prepping thing, right?
Was.
It is, right? Are today. But like prepping is about resiliency. Like it's about threat modeling. What is the worst case scenario?
And don't get me wrong.
How can I be resilient to the worst case scenario?
Yeah, and don't get me wrong. I've gotten the threat model wrong more than once in any of those types of things.
Sure. Yeah.
And,
over or under prepping, right, is a thing.
Yep.
Right. I mean, you can kind of shoot yourself in the foot if you stockpile the wrong goods and fill up your own infrastructure with the wrong things, right? Or under prepare for some of the things that you didn't anticipate needing, like toilet paper or water.
Yep. Let's put it this way. It's no word of a lie that we're prepared for stuff and we have extra stuff on hand.
Sure.
And that whole issue with the pandemic and toilet paper, like, what issue with toilet paper?
No.
We've bought toilet paper since it's become a little bit more readily available, but it's just to maybe top stuff back off again.
Yeah.
And
I was accidentally prepped for that because we had an overabundance of it here in the office, right?
Yep.
Like so.
Yep.
Yeah.
Lee,
we're getting word to prep for another run on the paper products. Our local Costco's are already limiting purchases because they're afraid we're going to get another surge like that. And have you seen the pictures down at the harbor at Long Beach of all those container ships that are totally full,
that's
but
an
nobody
issue.
can unload them?
Right.
Yep.
That's an issue as well. Also, here in Rhode Island, which county was it, Larry? I saw it on the news.
It's not hard.
There was, right. There was, was it Bristol or somewhere like that? There was a E. coli. They tested the water.
Yeah.
So speaking of water attacks, I wanted to relate
Bristol.
it. It was a Bristol. There was E. coli in the water.
Yep.
And so they had to affect a water ban.
Yeah, water boil
Boil your water. but they were interviewing business owners who were already stressed from the pandemic as to how they're making food and soup and all that stuff with the water ban in effect and how it's impacting it. So water definitely plays into critical infrastructure. I mean, we can go to the store and buy bottled water, but that's a limited kind of thing, right? Boiling water slows down that. You start coupling that with other attacks against other pieces of critical infrastructure, like power, like the supply chain. Lee, you mentioned the container ships, right? It could mean a really bad day if we're not resilient enough in planning for those kind of attacks.
Lee, I saw something on the news this morning, and we're getting way off reservation here, but way off the rabbit trail, as it were. But I saw something on the news saying that it could take up to 6 months for them to clear the backlog of container ships working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It is going into next year, like almost summertime of next year, for them to clear the backlog of those container ships.
I fully believe that it's at least a year from today, maybe a little more, maybe 2020. I'm hearing 2023 before the supply chain starts to return. Back to air quotes kind of normal, right?
My suggestion is be prepared for next year to have an influx of Squid Game costumes for Halloween, because that's when they'll arrive.
Yes.
They'll finally get here by then. So
is that the Korean TV show you guys were talking about? We started watching that.
It's amazing.
Don't spoil
the
it for me.
reason I'm thinking about this is my story about how Apple is finally getting backlogs because of the chip supply. They had done a lot of prepping and laying in ahead of supplies, setting an alternate supply routes. But even them, their prep had a limited window where they could do it. And now we're all kind of in this. We can't get the supplies, whether it's toilet papers or chips for graphic card or whatever. It's really frustrating, and surviving another year is going to be really hard.
To case in point, we'll tie that back to some more security stuff too. The one that the project that I'm waiting for was a Kickstarter project. It's not the Dolphin. It's the all-in-one RFID, I2C button hacking device, and the name is freaking escaping. The Flipper. The Flipper. They've had pretty massive supply chain issues in getting it completed, to the point that at the last moment they had to swap out one of the chips because even despite all of the promises and the contractual obligations from the factories in China to deliver a specific number of chips, they couldn't get them, and the factories said sorry.
But it's weird, how random it is, and it's how do you prepare for randomness like that? I ordered. We were talking about the Drobo recovery that I'm doing. The USB bus pirate, I could order from Amazon and was here the next day or the day after. Totally fine. Go try and find an RTX graphics card. You could find it, but you're going to pay 3 times, likely 2 to 3 times more than what it's valued at by the manufacturer in the MSRP.
But it's also a different market too. Is that how many people have built computers to build or to do that for gaming for millions, and how many people need a bus pirate?
Right. Yeah, supply and demand plays in.
Yep.
You're right.
Absolutely.
So speaking, just one last story that I wanted to hit, because many of us have worked for universities and or have supported the school systems, right? The Biden administration has actually signed into law, which is amazing. This became law. So if you remember your middle school or 6th grade or earlier history class, how laws are passed in the U.S., this is a law. And whether you agree with it or not, it's pretty amazing. This is a law on a school cybersecurity act has been signed into law that CISA will create guidelines and disclosure for the school systems. So and what's interesting is it doesn't give resources to school systems, which I find is the missing piece here. But it's a law that requires CISA to provide guidance to school systems. John Bambanek, Many of us know John. So John says, while studying the risks and creating free resources and guides is a good first step, the reality is that smaller and poorer districts won't be able to implement much of what's in the guide CISA will create, assuming they have any staff that can read and understand it in the first place. And I agree with John wholeheartedly. And I don't think that's, to me, I'm going to extend what John said and said that's not just smaller or poorer districts. That's most districts, in my opinion, in the United States that will read the guidance provided by CISA, much like the water systems we just talked about, and go, yeah, that's great, but like I don't have the resources to implement any of this stuff to be, and they're not necessarily compliant with the law. Like the law is that CISA has to report guidance and give guidance to schools, which was kind of misguided, in my opinion. As you know, Larry and I worked very much in Rhode Island with many of the school, universities and colleges, but
or
also
associated organizations.
But also, also the K through 12 school system was supported by RINET, right?
Yep,
was one of the resources there. They're very resource constrained, and not just in Rhode Island, but in most of the states in the U.S. They're all resource constrained. Yeah. They all have Chromebooks in IT support staff, but they're all resource constrained. So great, like you should tell them, like, hey, you should implement, something like the Security Onion or OS Query, which we talked about on the show. Like, but who's going to do that? And who's going to pay for all of that? Like, there was no funding. There was no teeth to this, which was
typical.
Concerning.
Typical.
Yeah.
With that,
thank you, everyone, for listening and watching this edition of Paul's Security Weekly. Larry, take us out.
Over and out.